The Federal Reserve is cutting rates. What does that mean for you? Should you bury yourself in a ton of good debt? And what should you prioritize, paying off your mortgage or investing more in a taxable brokerage account? You're about to find out.
Get to the bag.
Welcome back to the second episode of the Personal Finance Club show. Hey, Jen.
Hi, we did it.
I know we're actually recording this on the day that the first episode ever is launching, so it's a very exciting day. I was just saying before we were recording that, you know, the true measure of a podcast isn't like having an amazing first episode. It's like having like hundreds or thousands and improving and getting better over time. And so I think the first episode went great. Like it all launched, it like was well edited. We had like music, like I'm like thrilled out of the park. But we want to make it better and better and better. So hopefully this episode is even better.
Exactly. People are being very nice. The comment section is I'm having trouble finding things for Jeremy Had Time Today because people are really nice to you in your comment section.
Oh, well, let me just mention that maybe renting is a good idea for some people and they will tear me to shreds.
Eat you up.
So
Okay.
you will get the homeowners, the realtor. I don't know why people just get very angry at me at the mere suggestion that there might be alternatives to home ownership.
Okay, plant that seed. I'll check the comment section in about a week.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, welcome back for episode 2. Last time that we talked, you were fulfilling your civic duty of being on jury duty. You couldn't say anything. You were being very good about not saying anything. I had no idea. So now we need to know, what was it like? Tell us how the case was. Give us the details that you can.
Oh my God, John, I've been like bottling this up. It went into 4 weeks of jury duty.
Crazy.
It wasn't every day. It was actually 12 individual days that spread out over the course of 4 weeks. And from like, there's craziness from the day of jury selection until the day of the verdict, full of crazy stories. I was like basically bottling up because every single time you entered or left the room, they said, don't talk about this with anyone because if you do, it could impact the validity of the verdict. But now I can. And they literally say, once there's a verdict in, you can kind of say whatever you want. That said, this case was a civil case, meaning someone was suing someone else. It wasn't a criminal case, like the police were trying to convict someone of a crime. And it was involving a family. And so I don't really necessarily want to like blow them up too much, but
enough.
It was like a crazy story. And so I want to tell like basically what happened, some lessons we should all draw from avoiding getting into a situation like this, and then the verdict we came to. And so here's the basic story: is a grandma and grandpa, and there's really 4 plaintiffs, all in their 80s. And basically grandma owned some properties, and her daughter and her granddaughter and their 2 husbands, those 4 people, all lived in these properties over the course of 20 years. And at one point, the kids were like, hey, we want to upgrade to another property. And so grandma sold one of the properties, put this like $300,000 or so down payment onto the next property and said, hey, here's the deal. I'll put in the down payment to get you guys in. You guys pay for everything. You pay for the mortgage, you pay for the taxes, you pay for the upkeep. And then when you can pay me back or when you can refinance the loan, we'll roll my down payment out of that into the next rental property that we have. And so that's, I'm just trying to give you this like very brief overview. And this was, like I said, a 12-day case. So it was very complex beyond this, but that was the basic idea. So that all happened. They got in the home. Then they did this refinance and did not give grandma her money back. And as part of the refinance, the kids had to take grandma off the title. And grandma signed a letter basically saying, this is a gift. I'm giving them the entire house, bona fide gift, for free, for nothing. And she did it for the purposes of the kids being able to like refinance their loan. Mm-hmm. And her expectation was a week later, once the loan is secured, they're going to put the title back in her name because she still owns the property until she gets paid back her down payment. But that never happened. And so then as we were sitting there in the jury, like watching this case, like the increasingly frantic emails from this 80-year-old woman, I was like, hey, like I put this in your name very temporarily so you guys could get this refi, and you're not signing it back to me. Like, what's going on here? And fast forward 4 years, now we're in court to decide this. And that was like one, there's actually 15, I'm doing the 5-5-5 action if you're listening, causes of action. That was like, that was a few of them because they split it up for a few different ways. But then the kids and grandkids were countersuing for like 7 other reasons, including things like, for the 10 years we lived in your property, 55 months of those were uninhabitable because you, as a slumlord, the conditions were so terrible.
Slumlord?
Yeah, I know. You ruined our property because you had, during a remodel, your workers moved our couch outside and it got rained on. There's a loan. There's another loan for rent that went back and forth. There's an eviction notice at one point. Like, the whole thing was this gigantic mess. And it was like, it was just so messy because it was like, this covered like multiple properties over the course of literally 20 years. And both sides, once they like decided they hated each other, like threw all this spaghetti against the wall to see what would stick. And then like me and the other 11 jurors were like put in a room to decide, okay, who's who. And like that $300,000 deposit that never got paid back and grandma got taken off the title was kind of like the core piece of it, I think. But then there's like all these other little side issues that they were like airing. And so that's what happened. Like, some lessons I learned is a big first one, and this really made me appreciate all the problems I don't have in my life, because to my own credit, and I didn't even realize it before I was sat here watching this, I have not gotten into these types of situations. I'm not putting in down payments and having other people pay the loan and taking names on and off titles and getting into these really murky, complex situations. Like, I own my properties. When I was single, I own them. Now that I'm married, my wife and I own them, which is, murkier than being single a little bit. But, marriage introduces that kind of complexity. But I'm not getting into these very complex deals with multiple people and yada, yada, yada. And so I think that is like a good lesson about just having very clear boundaries in your own personal life and your own financial life. And then another really big lesson is, I think you should never loan money to family. And it sounds cold-hearted, but my take is, if you want to help family, you need to find peace with it being a gift. And so when grandma was getting into this really sticky situation where it's like, okay, I'm going to give you the $300K, but I need it back, she was opening up this potential problem where the kids became, in my opinion, comfortable with it. Like, well, we're paying for the house. She's off title now. It's really ours. She said along the, over the years, this was going to be our inheritance, so why not now, kind of thing. And then the two sides end up hating each other. And so grandma should have gifted it to him. And actually, when I was talking about this on Instagram, someone messaged me. They said, hey, here's my deal. I'll give you money. I'll give it to you as a gift. If you pay it back to me, great. Maybe I'll give you another gift. If you don't, that's the end of it. Right. Either way, I'm at peace. I've chosen that to be a gift, and you have the decision as the recipient if it's a loan or if it's a gift, and if you want to continue down this bank of friend or bank of family. So that was the situation.
Wow.
Do you want to hear how we ruled?
Yes.
Okay. And so, it was a little bit sticky because grandma signed this legal, notarized, filed with the county document that said, this is a bona fide gift. You get this house for free, for nothing in return. And, as a jury, I don't want to get into the deliberations too much because that was like a private thing and maybe it could open up the case to appeal or whatever. But as a jury, we're having to decide, is that ironclad, or do we have to weigh all the evidence, the emails, the context, the deal, the behavior? And, one thing that we never saw in the trial was the outraged emails from the kids saying, what do you mean you want this house back? This was always a gift. Nothing like that ever happened. So to us, it became exceedingly clear that this was always meant to be this complex temporary loan situation. And so we gave grandma back her money. We gave grandma back her $300.
Grandma.
Yeah. So grandma got, I mean,
Happy
I'm happy for her too. And, but like, I don't think she came out a winner. I don't think anyone came out a winner.
Right.
Like, the family seems to be torn apart. I hope they can overcome this. But yeah, grandma got her money. We didn't give kids money for the uninhabitable thing. I was like, that didn't come up until they got sued. And then they decided, for 55 months of living here, raising my kids, throwing parties, doing remodels, this was uninhabitable. We're like, okay,
that's shady.
That doesn't seem to be legitimate. And we were forced to, judge or be the jury of truth, and
Hmm.
what people were saying wasn't always consistent and things like that. And so that's what we did. Have you ever been on a jury?
Well, I think the second week that I was here at Personal Finance Club, I got a jury duty notice. I went for jury selection. I've never actually ended up on a jury, but the annoying thing about this time around was I went for the full day, the first day, which I think everybody kind of expects. And we were so close to selecting a jury. And then I had to go back the next day at like 10 a.m. and I was dismissed by 11. Very aggravating, but I made a couple of friends where we gave each other side eyes, like we could have stayed at home, girl.
Yeah,
But so I've never actually been on a jury, but I do love the lesson of, never loaning family money specifically. Could we probably extend that to friends as well.
I
Um,
think so. Yeah,
always just giving freely. I think that's a good life lesson in general. I'm Kenyan. I'm first generation American, so my parents are what are considered like a sandwich generation, where they, grew up supporting me and my siblings, and then also were supporting my grandparents and aunts and uncles and things like that. And I think that my mom learned that lesson a while ago now. But it's just like, you think like, oh, I'm gonna invest in this business in Kenya and it's gonna be great. And then, never sees that money again. I think there's like a cycle that you have to go through because you're so attached and you love people so much that you want to just give and say like, they're gonna do the best with it and give back. And now I think she just gives freely and is more careful with her money than she
totally.
was, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's a lesson you don't want to learn the hard way, because the
Hmm.
hard way involves destroying family relationships, right? And
Yeah, it's
families
unfortunate.
and friends tend to be more casual about things like signing leases and late fees. If you're dealing with a landlord that you don't know, they're like, okay, they're going to hit me with a late fee, and they're a business, and there's this like kind of arm's length relationship where you have like a business professional respect and expectations. With family, that gets squishier, and because that's squishier, these deals can just get really messy because both sides make assumptions about the other side, and there's not this clear distinction of roles and things like that. And so, yeah, keep it gifts. Help your family if you need
Yes.
it, and if you need that money back, you can't afford to loan it. That's what I say.
Yeah, well, congratulations on fulfilling your civic duty. We always want sane, smart, willing people on juries. I think a lot of people want to like escape jury duty. So I'm glad that I know it was inconvenient, but I'm glad that you did it.
Thank you. I know. Actually, I mean, this is my second trial ever, and I actually love the process. This case specifically was very long. It was supposed to be 8 days, which is already long for a civil trial. It stretched out to 12 days, and very frustrating because I felt like the attorneys were not being very respectful of our time. Like you're frustrating hour on the second day, which was unnecessary. Multiply that by 12 days of every
Right.
day, being like, aren't we like? Didn't we already go over this testimony? My God.
Yeah. Well,
But
you made it out. I'm proud of
yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Let's pivot. Let's get into our segments.
First segment. What is it?
Explain it like I'm 5.
I love explaining like I'm five because there's so many complicated financial things in this world, and everyone feels like they don't know, and everyone feels like they're the exception, and everyone feels like they're behind. And so I like to make things super simple. So what are we explaining today, Jen?
Okay, so at the time of this recording, the Federal Reserve just cut rates. The news cycle is ablaze, although when is it not ablaze? So what does it even mean for the Fed to cut rates? How can they dictate what interest banks charge for loans? Explain it like I'm 5, or like we said, maybe like I'm 15.
Yeah, five is tough. We're learning our numbers at 5, but I'll do my
Yeah.
best.
Okay.
I I have to be a little bit vulnerable and admit something. When you hear all the time in the news, the Fed's cutting rates, Jerome Powell, I mean, maybe you don't, but I do because I kind of follow this stuff. And even me, who has been doing this for 7 years, like, reads this stuff every day, I didn't really know what that meant. Like, I kind of understood that these rates they're cutting were interest rates. They kind of relate loosely to mortgage rates and savings accounts rates.
Mhm.
But, like, what is the Fed? How can the Fed tell the Bank of America what your savings account rate should be? What like actually is going on? And so I like really tried to learn deeply just for this episode so I could understand and explain it to you like we're all 5, I guess. And here's my understanding of what's going on. Banks are in the business of accepting deposits and paying interest. So if you are a saver, you can go up to a bank, you can give them $100, and then every year they'll pay 2% interest or whatever it is. And they're also in the business of loaning out money. So if you want to buy a home or grow your business or buy a car, you can go to the bank and then they'll give you money. And then the rate that they pay you for savings accounts, like these days, is around 3 to 4%. And the rate that they charge you for loans is around 7%. And so banks, that's their business model. They take all this money, they loan it all out, and then they pay less than they're charging. And then the delta is how they make money.
Right.
And so then where does the Fed come in? Isn't that like, and I think if there's only one bank in the world, like if we had this like little village with 100 people and there's one bank, it would be that simple. It would just be, everyone's money is in the bank and the banker's job is to keep track of it all and they make money in the delta. But we don't live in that simple of a society. We live in a society where, or at least in the US, in a country where there are thousands and thousands of banks and money constantly is flying between these banks as people make transfers and paychecks come from corporations to your account, and there are wires and there are deals and there are all the reasons that money's moving around. In order to track those transactions between individual banks would be logistically very, very difficult and problematic, because if one of those banks ended up not being able to make good on that transfer, the whole thing could like crumble and people and banks wouldn't trust each other and et cetera. Right. And it would be a very unfluid situation. So the Fed comes in and the Fed is very, explain it like 5 is kind of like the bank's bank. The banks, like, so if I go to, I'm in San Diego, if I go to San Diego County Credit Union, not a pitch, but it's like the closest bank to my current location.
Okay.
They keep their money at the Fed, as do all the other banks. And so when, my credit union has to send Bank of America money, it's really a transfer from the balance at the Fed between San Diego County Credit Union to Bank of America. And so the Fed is all the bank's bank. And that means since the Fed is tracking all these transfers between banks and holding all that money and also potentially lending out money themselves, the Fed can kind of set their own rules and they can set their own rate. And so when the Fed says we're raising or lowering the rate, what they're saying is, hey, when banks move money between each other, we're setting the rate at which those lend, like, since we control the rules, we control this bank, we're setting the rate. So let's say, San Diego Bank wants to give out a mortgage and they need more money. They need to go borrow it from another bank. The rate that they get on that loan is set by the Fed, more or less.
Okay.
And so that's basically how the Fed can set rates that then affect things. And then there's this trickle down, since that's the rate in this Fed bank between the banks, then there's this trickle down that happens to your savings account. So right now, if you go to get a high yield savings account, you're going to be getting about 4% interest. And if you go to get a loan, you're going to be paying about 7% interest, all based on this trickle down from what the banks need to pay to get that money or lend, or what they're getting paid to lend that money that's set by the Fed. Did that make any sense?
It actually did. And I'm glad. It makes me feel better that you had to do some research, because I was truly curious. And we hear about new Fed picks and interest rate cuts. And I'm confused. As the layman, I'm confused. So I'm glad that you had to do research as well, because you're supposed to know this stuff. Okay.
It's complicated.
It's
and
complicated.
Everyone feels behind. That's why we're doing this show.
Yeah. I guess my only thing is me, Jen Mundia. Does this affect me directly? If I'm listening, does this affect me? You kind of know a little bit about my life at this point. Would this affect me?
So that's a really good question, because there's the technical question of like, why does this work or how does this work? And then there's, the tea leaves that everyone's reading when the Fed comes out with news. We're lowering the rates, we're raising the rates. What does that mean? And the answer is it kind of depends on you. So if you're a person who doesn't borrow money and has tons of money in cash sitting in a high yield savings account, then, for the moment, you actually would prefer higher rates. You would much prefer 4 or 5 or 6% interest than 0. A few years back, rates were very, very low. And if you went to put money in a savings account, you would get about 0% interest, or maybe 0.1. Now it's more like 4%. If you're on the flip side, if you're not a saver, but you're a borrower, then you would prefer lower rates. So if you're going to buy a home right now, home buyers or potential home buyers are really looking forward to these rate cuts, because right now, 7% rates compared to recent history when they were more like 3 or 4% for a mortgage make your monthly mortgage payment a lot more expensive, like almost double in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
And so when they hear the Fed is lowering rates, they say, hey, that means that maybe banks are going to start offering cheaper mortgages so I can go buy that home that I couldn't have afforded before. And so as an individual, it kind of just depends. What are you doing right now with more of your money? Are you borrowing more money or are you saving more money? Most people tend to prefer lower rates because things like mortgages are more impactful to people's lives than savings accounts.
Yeah.
That said, economies are impacted differently. Economies like lower rates, like the whole US economy, real estate, buying real estate, building real estate, borrowing money for, hiring employees, like all these huge companies doing things, they want to be able to borrow money more inexpensively. So for example, if I'm trying to buy a new gigantic $100 million apartment building or something, if I can get it at 4% or 5%, that could make or break the entire deal.
Right.
And so when the Fed basically has this big lever, lower rates, higher rates, lower rates, higher rates. And they're trying to navigate the economy with this one lever. And so all the companies are saying, hey, lower rates are good. But the problem is if they just make lower rates all the way to zero, what happens is it basically floods new money into the economy. All these loans appear, new building, new hiring, yada, 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 yada. And that actually has this inflationary effect where now, since all this new money floods into the economy, suddenly people have more money and suddenly businesses can charge more money. And then you go to the grocery store that we've experienced the last few years, which is when a lot of money flowed into the economy. And now groceries are twice as much money. And if that inflation gets out of control, it can tear an economy apart at the seams. And so if inflation's getting high, the Fed yanks this lever back and says, well, we're going to raise rates to lower inflation. We're going to slow the influx of new loans, slow the influx of new money into the market, and to lower inflation. But then if businesses start laying off people and building stops, they're like, oh, that's not good. We're going to push the lever the other way. We're going to lower rates to increase business activity so that we don't have business slowing. And right now, unfortunately, what Jerome Powell said is kind of both. He's saying job growth is slowing, which is a cause for lowering of rates, but inflation is still too high, which is a cause of raising of rates. And so he's basically stuck between a rock and a hard place, and everyone blames him. So that's my understanding of rates. How'd that go?
That's pretty good. I actually feel like I have more of an understanding, and I'm glad that you touched on how this affects inflation, because that's been a big conversation so far as well. So thank you. I'm learning on my own podcast.
Yes.
Shout out.
As am I. I learned, I think I have a better understanding of this, behind the scenes Fed Bank of Banks and why their rates matter.
No, you did a good job. You should be a teacher. You
All
should
right.
sell courses.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a great idea. Our last episode, I wanted these to be more in the 20-ish minutes, so you can listen to on a commute. And I'm very long-winded, as you can tell, and we're already in a long episode. But so let's move on. What's our next segment?
Let's move on, but it's okay. I'd rather have the information, know the full extent of it, than cut things down. So let's move on to our next segment. Money. Can I ask a dumb one? Now, I'm really excited about this because this is our first question to podcast@personalfinanceclub.com, which is the email that you can email if you have a question for us.
Amazing.
Boom, baby. Okay, so this is from Claudia. She said I could use her first name. I asked her, so shout out Claudia. Claudia, we did cut your question down a bit because you was a little long-winded too, like Jeremy, okay? Sorry, girl.
That's right.
Appreciate you. You're our first question. We'll never forget you, but we summarized it. So I'm going to read this question. Jeremy's going to give his humble opinion about what you should do. So Claudia asks, my husband and I purchased a home in 2020 with a great interest rate. We're already maxing out our 401k. We want to set ourselves up for the best possible future. Should we be focusing more on paying down our mortgage or investing more in a taxable brokerage account? Jeremy.
Great question. And it's not clear to me. Can I ask a dumb one? Is it a dumb question or a dumb person answering? And, it might depend on the day.
I'm not calling either you or Claudia dumb. Okay. And
I think in this case,
yeah.
Hopefully it's neither. It's not a dumb question. It's a great question. And we'll see if it's a dumb answer. So first of all, you're crushing it, Claudia. You say you're debt free except your home. You're maxing out your 401k, which is $23,500 a year. You're crushing it. The answer to this question is not a matter of you're going to do poorly or you're going to do well. You're doing well, no matter what you do with the answer to this question. And so that's the first thing. Way to go. And as a lesson to anyone listening, if you can get yourself here where Claudia is, paid off all your debt, maxing out your 401k, own a home, like that's like totally winning with money. So way to go. That said, you're choosing between two good options. With this excess money you have from your income, are you going to put that money by paying down your mortgage more quickly or investing more money outside of your 401k in what's called a brokerage account and a taxable brokerage account? She also said she purchased a home in 2020, which means she's at a historically low interest rate. Her interest rate's probably around 3%. And so the first thing that I could say is, for sure, on the spreadsheet, any of that extra money you could put into a high yield savings account and get 4%, and then keep paying your mortgage as slowly as possible. And then the day that, your high yield savings account starts paying less than your mortgage charges, go and take all the money, dump it directly into your mortgage, and you'd be strictly better off. And so, strictly by the math, letter of the law, there's no real reason to pay off a mortgage more quickly when the interest rates are higher. On top of that, you can actually do better than a high yield savings account. You could be investing that money in an index fund, for example, which doesn't pay 4%, that historically pays 10%. The problem with your 10% is it's not guaranteed. Your 4%, it's guaranteed until they change the rate. With the 10%, the market could drop tomorrow and you won't get 10%. You could get negative 10%. And so that's kind of like a range of options. What you do kind of depends on your risk tolerance and what you want out of life. Like I said, this is choosing between two good options. If you say, hey, I'm comfortable with the debt, I don't care about making this mortgage payment, I'm looking for a chance at a bigger, long-term outcome, I'm just going the index fund route. I'm going to just dump all this extra money into investments, and I'm going to accept the fact that maybe the market's going to crash temporarily at some point, and I will have to look at myself in the mirror and say, oh man, I could have paid off this mortgage, but instead I still have the debt and this money has gone down by half. But maybe that's still the option you want. Or maybe you want to do that like savings account arbitrage thing I mentioned, where you basically just save it all up until the moment that the rate inversion is no longer true, and then pay it all off in one chunk. Or, and this is not a crazy option, Claudia, you could just ignore all that fancy schmancy mumbo jumbo about this greater long-term return and pay off your stupid mortgage, even though it's at 3%. Because you know what? If you have a paid for home and that first month comes where you don't make a mortgage payment, that's pretty sweet. And like, let's say your mortgage payment's $3,000 a month. If suddenly you don't have a $3,000 a month mortgage payment anymore and you have $3,000 a month of free cash plus all the excess that you're paying off on it, which is maybe another $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, and you just had $5,000 of bonus money, like what would that mean for your life? That could mean like a fantastic vacation every single month.
Yeah,
it could
I like
mean
the sound of that.
Yeah, it could mean new cars. It could mean like sleeping like an absolute baby because you have no debt owed to anyone. And so while like there's like the spreadsheet answer, which is like, yeah, you probably shouldn't pay off. And then there's like the life answer, which is, hey, do what you want. And
right.
if someone comes to me and says, hey, I paid off my 30-year mortgage in 10 years and now I'm living mortgage free with a cash flow surplus of $6,000, I would never say to them, you dummy, you could have a slightly higher net worth right now if you would have, invested it back then. I'd say, you're crushing it. I am jealous of you and I want to be in your shoes, right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
that's the answer. There's no correct answer. It's a personal answer. And I absolutely give you permission to pay off that low interest rate mortgage if you want to. And I also give you permission to take the more like risky, ambitious route of investing it too if you want. There ain't nothing wrong at all about having a few $100,000 in a taxable brokerage account, because you can take that out and spend it on whatever you want one day.
I love it. Love two good options. And I love this because these are the kind of questions that you get in your inbox all the time. And also when you do office hours. So it's cool to be able to have a platform now to talk about. I'm sure a lot of people have this question. It's a good problem to have, but it's something that people don't really know what to do. So awesome.
And in longer form, I like, people ask me this over DM, and I sometimes I try to scroll out an answer in a DM, but it involves some context and me screaming into a microphone for a few minutes to really instill the options you have before you.
You love yelling into a microphone. All right. Thank you so much, Claudia. I'm so happy that we got to answer your question on the air. All right, let's get into our next segment. Scroll Patrol.
Scroll Patrol.
Bow, bow,
This is a good one.
Okay, so these actually terrify me. I've been scouring the internet for financial advice, and some of it feels so risky to I don't even want to air some of these things. So I'm nervous, but we're going to watch a video together. I've seen it. Jeremy has not, and he's going to react to it and tell us what he thinks. So Jeremy, go ahead and click that link. And let me know what you think about this Scroll Patrol, and then we'll tell the internet what we think as well.
I'm opening it. I already recognize the thumbnail, or at least the face of the thumbnail.
Right.
So how do I get rich? I borrow money, and I buy assets with it. The poor person borrows money and buys liabilities like purses, cars, houses, and they get poorer and poorer and poorer. But I use debt. I borrowed $300 million after the crash, dollars. In 2000, by 2010, I had borrowed $300 million to buy real estate. That made me rich. And the interest rates kept coming down, so that my cost of money kept coming down. And so everybody else is saying, oh, you should get out of debt. You know why? Because they don't question the hypnosis they're under. You've been hypnotized to work hard for money, to save it. The fractional reserve system prints it. And then you pay taxes and taxes. So I have all this debt and I get rich. So the question is, how do you learn to use debt to get rich? Because they tell you not to get out of debt. So all I'm saying to you is, if a person does not question what they've been taught, they will always be poor.
All right. So that was Robert Kiyosaki, who is the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And, like all outrageous personalities, there's kind of like a hint of truth and a kind of greater context that needs to be explained. And so I liked a lot of what he was saying, which is you want to buy assets, not liabilities. An asset is something that you own, has value, pays you while you own it, and is likely to go up in value. So if I buy an index fund, that's an asset. If I buy a share of Apple, that's an asset. If I buy a rental property, that's an asset. All those things pay me just for owning them, and they're likely to go up in value. If I buy a boat, that's a liability. Boats go down in value. They have a lot of maintenance, upkeep, gas, docking fees, trailer, repairs. And I think, and I also think a lot of what he was kind of implying there is that like a lot of people don't see that picture. We're kind of all trapped in the rat race where it's like, okay, I go to my job, work for money, I spend my money on liabilities, repeat. And when you're in that work for money, spend on liabilities, repeat cycle, then you just are on the mouse wheel forever, right? Whereas if you get into a asset-rich position where you own a lot of assets, you own a lot of real estate, you own a lot of index funds, then your money is doing the work for you and you can just live. So that part's true. His like fixation and romantification, is that a word? Romanticizing? What's the word?
Check that. Romanticizing. I think
Romanticizing.
that is a word. I don't know how you'd use it in the correct grammatical context.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
we know what you mean.
His romanticizing of debt, I don't agree with, because I think that it has lots of nuance to it. So, for example, if I took out a credit card and bought a jet ski, that would be like the worst thing you could do, and he would agree with that because that's a liability. A jet ski is a liability. If I got a low interest rate mortgage and bought a really good rental property that has like all sorts of good characteristics, like a high cap rate and, isn't risky and, down list, that, and that's a whole book you could read about, real estate investing, then that could be a good investment, even considering the debt, but it's still, it includes certain risk. And so when I've met people who have been absolutely annihilated in finances, it's because of debt.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met guys that talk like him, who had, 300 million is an absurd amount of money to have individually in debt, but like, to have had $1 or $2 or $5 or $10 million in debt on, a $12 million real estate piece of property, and that $12 million real estate property, for whatever reason, becomes worth $9 million. And suddenly, not only are they not worth 12 million, they're not worth the 2 million equity they had, they're worth negative $1 million. And, being worth negative $1 million is not a good position to be in. And so, I don't hate, I'm like much more anti-debt than he is. I've had almost no debt in my life. I don't like owing money to people. I am asset rich. I have a net worth of north of $6 million at this point. And I do have a small mortgage relative to my net worth, about $500,000 on my home. And that's my only debt. And I personally don't see a lot of value in going to try to reach this $300 million in debt position, because while maybe it could, that leverage is called when you borrow debt to buy more expensive assets to grow more quickly, could accelerate wealth more quickly, it can also bankrupt you, And for me, and I think for most people, it's not worth that trade-off. There's ways you can do it in less risky ways. And so, and so Robert Kiyosaki is a very lightning pull, what's it called? Like lightning rod kind of figure. Mm-hmm. And he says some good things. He says some not so good things. He's the kind of guy he's correctly predicted. This is one of my favorite quotes. He's correctly predicted 37 out of the last 3 market crashes. And that's a joke because,
I was like, wait a minute.
he says it's going to happen 37 times and it happens 3 times. He's like, see, I told you, right? And so when Robert Kiyosaki says you should be buying silver because the market's going to crash, which he also says, I'm like, I don't really trust that. But it's a perspective that I think is good to be aware of and to talk about.
Yeah, it's funny. As you were talking, I looked up when Rich Dad, Poor Dad came out. It was 1997. Because it's a book we all have heard about our whole lives, essentially, right? And so I had no idea that he was on the internet going crazy.
No, it's an incredibly good book title. The book is good, not great. It's not like, I don't think it's like the Bible of personal finance or anything. It's just, it talks about assets and liabilities, which I think is valuable. Yeah. But yeah, I think he's, maybe not giving the best advice for most people these days.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Good to know. That one scared me a little bit, but I'm glad we got through it together. It's time for our last segment. Money. Jeremy had time today.
I had time today. I do have a lot less time now that I have a 7-month-old baby. But I still respond to a lot of DMs, and I got one of these DMs.
Yeah, you are always in one thing about you're going to be in the comment section. Like when I scroll through your Instagram, you're replying. I'm like, respect.
I know, like to mix it up.
So you sent me this what looks like a text message. Is that correct?
No, this is an Instagram DM.
Oh, it's Instagram. Okay, they made it look so much like iMessage. It's crazy. Anywho, so I think what we should do is we should read it. Do you want to be you, or do you want to be the other person?
I'll be me, because I do think that I my tone of voice in this might be important.
It's very specific. Okay, so I'll be this person who wrote to you and said, "What are you talking about? You still haven't retired."
And for some context, I posted something about how I retired at 36, and then he said this.
You in the middle of the scene? Come on, man.
Okay, let's
start over.
We can edit this and put the context at the top.
No, I'm leaving this in.
Okay, whatever. All right.
Let me start the text over again.
Okay, start over.
Scene. Okay. What are you talking about? You still haven't retired.
What do you mean?
Your bio says you're retired, but you pretty clearly run a social media page as a job.
Oh, well, I started this for fun in retirement. What am I allowed to do to be considered retired?
Generally, people that are retired don't have jobs.
Well, what counts as a job? And then he didn't respond. So I responded again. That's how much time I have. And I said, anyway, it's not a job. Almost all the money goes to my team and charity. I live off of my investments. If that doesn't satisfy the retirement police, then you got me.
All right, fair play.
I like this one because I think I actually won him over.
Yeah.
And, there's this concept called the retirement police where we talk a lot about early retirement. And I don't want to live in a world where I work until 65 or 70, and then, just scrape together a rice and beans means on social security, right? And so why not 65? Why not 60? Why not 50? Why not 40? Why not 36? Which is when I officially was living off of my investments forever, as I currently still primarily do. But then sometimes the retirement police come and say, hey, but you have this other stream of income, you don't count. And so that was my answer. I was like, okay, fine. If it doesn't count, it doesn't count. But, I do have a paycheck from Personal Finance Club, but it's the same as Jen's.
Yeah,
and it's not enough money.
Not too much on my salary. Hold up.
I know.
Not too much.
And, and I'm supporting a family of 4 now in Southern California with a primarily stay-at-home mom who's a highly, very successful attorney, but who decided to help raise our kids. And so Jen can attest that, it ain't covering all those bills. And so, does this count as retirement? I don't know. But, I like this conversation because it questions the whole premise of what is retirement. And I think most people who retire early, like I did, don't just sit on a rocking chair with a blanket on their lap, watching sunsets for the next 55 years if you're retired at 40 or whatever it is.
And you did have your time when you took trips and you took time off between starting Personal Finance Club. You had a moment.
Yeah. There was a day where I quit my job. I sold my company. I quit my job, and there was a day, and actually more like a year and a half, where I literally had no obligations. But then things came up. My friend coached a volleyball team, and she's like, "Do you want to be my assistant coach?" I was like, "Yeah." And then that was a job kind of. I paid minimum wage or something. And then I was like, "Ooh, I'll start an Instagram account for fun with no obligation of no expectation or plan to make money." But then it grew so much, then there became a business that kind of popped up around it. And so does that make me unretired? And on the face of it, if someone looks at my day, it probably looks like I'm not retired, because here I am in an office on a microphone doing what maybe is this work, I don't know,
owning businesses.
Yeah. So anyway, if you're on the retirement place and you say I'm not retired, fine, you're right. But for me, I can quit every source of income other than my investments and still be very, very likely to live a happy, healthy life forever. To me, that's retirement, because that means I'm doing exactly what I want to do with my time.
I want to be like you when I grow up. Meanwhile, we're the same age.
You're in your mid 30s. I'm in my late 40s.
Maybe I'm hitting 40 next year. Okay, so that's great. I honestly, the thing I was most curious about is how you got to end an internet conversation with fair play, because that never happens. You're pretty good at diffusing situations, but yeah,
the first time
incredible.
Ever someone changed their mind on the internet.
I love that. Well, you did have time for that, but we are out of time here on our second episode of the Personal Finance Club show. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next week.
And don't forget to follow the 2 rules of Personal Finance Club. Rule number 1, live below your means. And rule number 2, invest early and often.
The Personal Finance Club show is produced by Jeremy Schneider and Jen Mundia. Music by Esabalu and Homie. Send your questions to podcast@personalfinanceclub.com. The Personal Finance Club show is co-hosted by Jeremy Schneider, who is a co-owner of Nectarine, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The views expressed on this show are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Nectarine. Please refer to hellonectarine.com for all relevant disclosures. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any security. Listeners should consult their own financial, legal, or tax professionals for advice specific to their situation.